I'm BERNINA Expert Amanda Murphy, and I wanted to show you how I bind my quilts with my BERNINA L890 serger. I like to use a 4-thread overlock stitch, but there is a hitch. I put both fusible thread and Serger in the lower looper. So here I'm threading through the tension disc, and one of the things I love about this machine is that if I have any questions at all regarding threading or anything else, I have a guided mode that I can consult right on the screen. The air threader grabs both threads at the same time, and I bring the threads through to the back of the sewing area. Then I sew to create a thread tail, and that thread tail is going to be a little thick because it has the Charlotte's Web fusible thread in it. I attach the cutoff bin, and now I have to go to my machine settings. Now this is the guided mode I told you about, and I've already set up the machine, but you can see there's videos available for every step of the process. I like to set my machine to stop with its needle down. I lower my presser foot pressure to about a 2, and that's a dial at the top of the machine. And then I change my left needle tension to somewhere around a 5.4. This can change depending on my batting, but it basically compensates for the thicker fabric and prevents the stitches from spreading when I pull the binding open. And then, because this is an amazing BERNINA machine, I can go ahead and save this stitch into my favorites folder, and I'm going to save it as binding so I can find it really easily. The BERNINA L890 is the first serger I've had where I've really felt comfortable exploring the machine without having to open the manual because everything's right on the screen. Plus, it looks like a sewing machine, so that's even better. So next time I come back to my favorites menu, I'll see the binding stitch right at the top. Perfect. I'm so obsessed with this machine, I actually designed a serger cover-up pattern that looks just like it, and you can find it either at your local BERNINA dealer or on my website. I place the seam guide on at a 1/4 inch, and I'm ready to serge. So I bring my quilt over. I start with the tail of binding that I leave loose just like I would on a regular sewing machine, and I put the quilt under the presser foot, and I begin to serge through the binding and the quilt. Sometimes I use the seam gauge like I showed you here, and other times I take off the seam gauge and I just take off a little sliver of fabric as I go. It just depends. I'm approaching a corner, so this is where I need to slow down. So there's my corner. I'm going to mark on my binding right over where my quilt ends, and then I'm going to make another line a 1/4 inch up from that, and that is my pivot point. So then I sew down until I hit that first line, and then I serge off the edge of the quilt. Now I fold open my binding and I miter it. Then I lift up my presser foot and I put the quilt back underneath, and I serge back onto the quilt through all the layers. What I love about applying binding with the serger is how easily the fabric feeds through the machine. There's no rippling, no puckering. Okay, here we are at another corner. I think this was the last corner. I just filmed it again so you could see it. I made that little line, and then I made a line a 1/4 inch above it. I sew to the first line, the one that's a 1/4 inch above, and then I pivot off at 45 degrees. I clip the threads. I miter the corner, and I feed it back under the serger. here we go. And I do like to use a quilting glove on my left hand. I actually have nothing on my right, but I do frequently use a quilting glove on my left hand to give me better grip when I'm binding. Now I'm approaching the end here. And so what I'm going to do is serge right off the fabric, sort of at an angle, okay? And then I'm going to join the two ends of my binding together. Now this is 2 1/4 inch binding, which is usually what I cut my binding to. And so that means the binding needs to overlap at slightly under that, maybe 2 1/8 inches. I still join my binding the traditional way. I just like how it looks better. So now I draw a 45-degree line on one side of the binding. My head's in the shot a little bit, so I apologize, but I think you guys can see pretty well. So there's my 45-degree line. And then I'm going to pin the two ends of the binding together. And oftentimes, if I'm in a rush, I just serge this as well. And I don't even bother taking out the fusible thread and then rethreading it. I just serge the whole thing. Sometimes I will change my presser foot pressure back down to a normal setting, because remember, I've lowered my presser foot pressure because I was fitting the quilt top to it. Other times I forget, and it still works out just fine. You want to take your time here and be careful so that you get a nice join. Now I'm going to take the quilt back to the serger and serge this seam. And I've gone ahead and engaged the cutting blade and taken off the seam guide. So I'm going to be very careful not to sew over my pins. I'm going to remove them. And I'm watching my left needle here, and I'm making sure that it falls over the line that I drew on the binding. And it is now time to pin and finish serging the seam. Now it is time to tell you all my secret, and that's that after filming this entire thing, I got the C27 clear foot, and it really is a game changer for this technique because you can see the lines really clearly with this foot. So I just wanted to show you this up close. And right now, this is the other method. I don't have a seam gauge on, and I'm just letting the cutting blade trim just a sliver of fabric as I go, like barely anything. You can see just a little bit coming off here. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so you can see what it looks like as you approach a corner. So here I am. I'm going to make that little mark where the quilt ends underneath the binding, and then another mark 1/4 inch above. And now as I approach that mark, I will really be able to see it because of that clear foot. So I think I'm sold on that. Once again, I need to miter it. It's just perfect because my visualization was so good. And then I feed it back into the machine. Once you've serged the binding onto the quilt, it's time to visit the ironing station. And for that, I have my fabulous Laurastar Smart-U. It has better steam than I have ever had on any other iron. And you can see I'm very lightly pressing open the binding. You don't want to do this too long, particularly with a powerful iron, because remember, we have fusible on the underside from the lower looper, and so we don't want to activate that fusible as we iron it open. So I go very quick here, just ironing open these seams. I turn the quilt over, And then I wrap the binding around and steam it to set it with my iron. Now, I still go back and hand stitch this. If you prefer to sew the binding to the back and turn it over to the front and machine stitch it, that is fine. But what I love about this technique is it really holds the binding in place. I still love the process of hand binding. I find it relaxing and I like how it looks. But this has saved me many a show when I haven't had time to bind it before I've had to leave, and it looks great. So I'm mitering the corner here. And one of the things about the Laurastar Smart-U is it has a fan system underneath, and so it really pulls the steam down into the board. So I'm getting pretty close to the iron without getting burnt, which is really important. And it's because that steam is being drawn into the board. And this is ready for me to hand bind at my leisure. I hope you've enjoyed learning how I bind my quilts with my BERNINA L890 serger. Please subscribe to me on YouTube at Amanda Murphy Design and join my Facebook group at Quilting with Amanda Murphy. I do live streams on both platforms to help you with your quilting. You can ask questions, and I hope to see you there.